So I flew from Wellington, New Zealand, back to New York City. The reason I went back to New York City was just for 1 week. I got my certificate in bioenergetic analysis. So now I'm certified. So after a week in New York, I flew back to the Middle East to live in Bethlehem in the Palestinian West Bank. So one more time, I'm confronted with the reality of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And I was also confronted once again with tremendous violence. There were bus bombings and shootings and arrests, mostly between Palestinians and Israelis. And it was extremely complicated. And at times I got caught in some of this violence as well. So it brought up a lot of those memories from Beirut when I had been living there. But I'd already become a little bit familiar, unfortunately, with living in situations of violence. But as always, there was a huge surprise waiting for me. So I spent a lot of my time traveling back and forth between the Palestinian West Bank and Israel. I was encountering the Jewish, Muslim, Christian traditions all over the place. And as you know, in Jerusalem in particular is the Western Wall, or what's called the Wailing Wall, which is very sacred to the Jewish population. You also had the Dome of the Rock, or Al-Aqsa Mosque, which was a very sacred place for the Muslim community. Then you had in Bethlehem the Church of the Nativity, that's recognized by the Christian community as the birthplace of Jesus. Now, why is this important? Because you had culture, politics, economics, religion, and languages, all very diverse. But all of these needed to be taken into consideration if I was going to work with the people from all of these different perspectives, respect their bodies, respect their psyche, and understand how to help to move things forward in a healthy way from the little bit of individual work that I would be doing there. Now, two interesting things happened to me here. The first one was there were a group of Israelis who knew bioenergetics. Some were in the process of being certified in bioenergetics. So since I was certified, they would ask me to come up and do supervision or do sessions with them. And so I would travel to different places in Israel, and I would work through bioenergetics, meaning we talked about the psychodynamics that was going on as they were doing the body work, we dealt with the emotions, and we did sort of traditional bioenergetic analysis. However, in the Palestinian West Bank, where most people did not speak English very fluently, different from the Israelis who were quite fluent in English, I only had an 8th grade education in Arabic, so it wasn't very advanced. So I couldn't use Arabic, I couldn't use English. And so their consciousness was not even around what we call Western psychotherapy. They were Middle Eastern people and they thought differently and their culture was very different. So I actually simply did body work with them. I was using the skills that I had in bioenergetics, but we didn't do hitting or pounding. I didn't try to get emotions at all. I just activated the tremor mechanism and then I facilitated it moving through the body the best I could. And I was shocked because it worked really well. They didn't need to deal with me around emotions. They didn't need to deal with me around the history of their childhood or their parents or whatever other emotional issues they had. All they wanted to do was relieve stress from living in such a tense situation in life. So now this is where I began to split. In Israel, I was doing bioenergetics and including the psychoanalysis or history, psychotherapeutic concepts, whereas in the Palestinian West Bank, all I did was body work. That's when I began to see that, holy cow, this tremor mechanism has, quote, a therapeutic potential all by itself. Even without the psychodynamic component of it, it still has a potentially healing capacity within itself. Now, the second lesson was very interesting for me. I had both Jewish friends, Christian friends, and Muslim friends. I had friends in the Palestinian territories, and I had friends in Israel. What was very interesting for about the first 3 months there, all of these different groups generally wanted me to side with them or pick a side as to who was right or wrong. It put me in a big conflict because I would always say, I can't choose a side. I'm just looking at the suffering that's happening in everybody. Now, this came, if you remember, way back from Mother Teresa, who was non-political. She simply worked with the poorest of the poor. And she taught me to not look at the differences, but look underneath and look at humanity. And is humanity suffering? And if so, that's where you're supposed to direct your focus and your energy. And so for about 3 months, my first 3 months there, the Israelis and the Palestinians, the Muslims, Christians, and Jewish communities did not trust me because I did not choose a side. And that was really interesting. I insisted I wasn't going to choose, and I was going to stay neutral. And it actually was quite easy for me because I did see the suffering going on in all of these communities. And what I realized after about 3 months is they began to trust me. They began to trust that I was honest and sincere about not choosing a side. And that was very valuable for them, that I didn't do that. It was also a very valuable lesson for me. What ended up happening after being there for about 2.5 years, I actually got Palestinian friends and Israeli friends to come together, and we just did straight TRE. We didn't do bioenergetics. And all I did was I had an Israeli lay down on the floor while a Palestinian would watch their body tremor. And then we would reverse that, and I have the Palestinian lay on the floor and watch the Israeli person tremor. And it fascinated all of us because what happened was, with no effort at all, we simply saw the human organism struggling to come back to life from its tightness and its tensions, which we all see in the TRE community. But they actually saw below their culture, below their language, below their religion, down to the human organism. And that was hugely successful and insightful for all of us. And from that is when I really solidified what I think to be TRE, in the sense that I would only use the tremor mechanism. And to quote somebody who recently told me that she believes that the tremor mechanism is a genetic inheritance of the autonomic nervous system that all human beings share. And so how natural it is to look at that tremor mechanism as part of our genetic encoding, and immediately all we see is the human organism trying to come back to life. And that was the most valuable lesson I could ever have learned in the Middle East. So what was my takeaway from this experience? In my very little way, I actually used the tremor mechanism and my neutrality as a way of trying to help promote and introduce peaceful cohabitation among the Muslims, Christians, and Jewish communities, as well as the Israelis and the Palestinians. There were already many diverse efforts trying to do this. I believe the tremor mechanism, in some small way, helped to contribute to that. And then we can relate this very directly to what Gabor Mate said. He said, safety is not the absence of threat. It is the presence of connection. And that's what the tremor mechanism did. It created connection. Now that's the psychological element, or the psycho-emotional, psychosocial element. Combine that with the faith and traditions and religions of these three groups, which was important to them. And you have the Christians who say, And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. And the Jewish tradition says the highest form of wisdom is kindness. And the Muslim tradition says the bravest heart is the one that stays close to Allah even when it is in pain. Combine the three of those, and what I did in a very simple way with the tremor mechanism and just simple human relationship evoked these messages that these people carry deep within their religious and spiritual traditions. Now, this also got reinforced, as we know, from Bessel van der Kolk, when he also tells us very clearly being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. Once again, this comes from our psychological perspective and neurological. But let's combine this with some of the wisdom figures that we've had in our lives as well. Martin Luther King Jr. says to us, we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will perish together as fools. We're getting this message throughout all of life. We've got to somehow try to find a way to come together as a species rather than be separated and divided because of various cultural, political, socio-economic divisions. And of course, Stephen Porges tops this all off with telling us that once we define ourselves as an organism whose survival is dependent on opportunities to successfully co-regulate, then we have moved into the life space of others. And so he just solidifies for us, we are a living organism, and our greatest happiness, safety, and prosperity in terms of moving forward is going to be by seeing ourselves as one species. So now I'm finished in the Middle East again, but I realized when I was working with the tremor mechanism that I didn't have a strong enough background in anatomy and physiology to understand how to use it exclusively and move it through the structure. So I needed some additional education, and I didn't want it to be in theory, so I returned to the United States and I went to massage school for 1 year. Now, I didn't want to become a massage therapist, but I needed to touch and feel the tissue as I was activating the tremor mechanism to understand how does it move through the structure, where might the obstacles be, what are the fascia or muscle groups that might be preventing it from moving. And this helped me to develop much more strongly what we now call TRE, because now I'm almost exclusively using the tremor mechanism and I'm moving it through the structure, understanding better what's going on. So after massage school, I actually left the religious community that I had been a member of for 22 years, and I was hired by a counseling center that did a lot of work internationally. And since I was familiar with Arabic in the Middle East, this counseling center sent me to Sudan, which is where my next journey is, and that's where TRE really solidified.